Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest virtual event from the Canadian Club of Toronto. My name is Bruce Sellery, and I am the president of the Canadian Club. Today, our focus is on innovation, and we have brought together an extraordinary panel of some of the country's leading investors and top entrepreneurs to focus on where the innovation economy is headed, how it's faring right now, what investments are going on, what the recovery might look like, because it is the understatement of the century to say that this is a challenging time across all parts of the economy. And certainly tech is a part of that. Just yesterday, we heard that Incubator 111 was ceasing operations. So challenges left, right, and center. But it is also a time of opportunity. And I don't just mean that in a business context. I mean the opportunity to think differently, to make a difference, and to innovate. Because one of the biggest hurdles to innovation everywhere is change aversion. And, some people are like, I don't want to work from home. Well, you know what? You don't have a choice, because this is the new world that we are in. So from an innovation perspective, there's a lot of that going on too. We just have to find a way to make it work. And here at the Canadian Club, for 123 years, we had these lovely, amazing events in hotel ballrooms. Well, we can't do that anymore, so we have hopped on the virtual event train, and we're so glad you're here to join us for that. A couple of things that you can see on your screen in front of you. First is click here to switch stream. If you happen to be in an environment where you've got 3 children homeschooling on devices around your house and your broadband's insufficient to carry the load, that will be a way to consume less bandwidth and have you still participate in our event. We really encourage you to ask questions. So there is a questions tab. Just pop that open, submit your question, and our moderator will include as many of those as he can in our conversation. There's also a request help button. That is if you have a problem with the technical aspect of this broadcast. It has nothing to do with the timing of your DoorDash delivery, I'm afraid. Our event today is hosted in partnership with The Logic. You'll hear from David in just a minute. It is sponsored by PwC, and these events just don't happen without the support of our sponsors, so we really are grateful to PwC for stepping up on that front. The Logic is going to be offering up a 1-year subscription to their publication to a random asker of a question. So how's that for an added incentive to put your 2 cents in? After this discussion concludes, The Logic will follow up with the winner. It is now time to introduce our panelists. Kim Furlong is the CEO of the Canadian Venture Capital Private Equity Association. Andrew Graham is the co-founder and CEO of Borrowell and past president of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Neha Khera is a partner with 500 Startups. Michele Romanow is a dragon on CVC's Dragon's Den and co-founder and president of Clearbanc. Kirk Simpson is the co-founder and CEO of Wave. He, as you can see from his shot, will also be offering up a weather report live from his backyard at some point in our conversation. And today's moderator, David Skok, founder and editor-in-chief of The Logic. Now, one of the traditions of the Canadian Club that we have followed for a very, very long time is a toast. So to our panelists, to our moderator, to those of you joining us at home, grab anything with a liquid in it, a martini glass, a coffee mug, and please join us in a toast to Canada. To Canada.
Yeah.
All right, David, panelists, I turn the virtual Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and welcome to you all joining us around the country, across the country. Obviously, we wish we were doing this under better circumstances, but it's delighted to be with all of you today. For those of you that don't know about The Logic, we are a publication that started in 2018, a startup like any other startup in this country, and we are focused on the innovation economy and Canada's transformation to a knowledge economy. My one promotion for you this evening is if you would like to try us out, we do currently have a trial where you can sign up for our daily briefing, which goes out every afternoon. Just go to the website, thelogic.co, and sign up there. On to our wonderfully distinguished panelists. I really want to give people a sense before we go into where we are today and what the impact of the coronavirus will be on where we were. Let's set the table a little bit on how optimistic people were feeling about the innovation economy in Canada as recently as a month and a half ago. And to do that, I wonder if Perhaps, Kim, I could start with you. As someone who represents many venture capitalists and in turn companies in Canada, give us a sense of where we were in February of this year in terms of the mood around the Canadian innovation economy.
Thanks, David. Well, we came to market only a few weeks ago, looking back on 2019, and venture, especially, at the best year it ever had. If we look back at 2013, we were recording at CVCA about $2 billion in investment, and the road that we traveled to get to 2019, which was the best ever year, has just been phenomenal. And the number, especially of growth rounds, if I think about Verifin of 500 million, Touch Bistro, Repair Therapeutics, like large amounts of dollars going in to companies, which was unprecedented. Like the summer, the Q3 in Canada in 2019 really gave us a sense that the ecosystem was strong. We were building companies that were getting large financing rounds, and that we were on track to not only start them, but build them here. So everyone expected, however, that we would have an economic correction. We were fundraising. People thought, there will be, after, quarter over quarter, year over year, bull run, lots of dry powder. How do we prepare for an economic correction, which was inevitable, but no one expected what we got, say, 6 or 7 weeks ago.
Yeah, Neha, you were part of a global VC with a Canadian presence. How excited were your partners and you about the Canadian opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Kim said. I think the speed and the intensity with which everything just came to a grinding halt was absolutely shocking. I think for us, our San Francisco offices were probably 2 weeks ahead of where Canada was in terms of starting to shut things down. So, but I don't think anybody anticipated the intensity with which things would sort of come down. We were, operating as per usual right up until sort of the beginning of March, and had to really quickly change course and figure out a new strategy.
So that brings us to our CEOs. For me, it was the Sequoia Capital Black Swan note that was the first kind of canary in the coal mine to say, hold on a minute, start reserving that capital. I guess starting with Andrew, how prepared were you for the great lockdown as a business, and what has been the impact, the immediate impact on Borrowell?
Well, I think the lockdown portion of it has maybe been the easiest, in the sense of we already all worked from laptops and had a good setup. So moving home was probably the least complicated part of this. What's been challenging for us in our business, we help connect consumers to financial advice and financial products. And we've seen a huge spike in interest in those topics as many consumers struggle. We did a survey, and found that 74% of our members were experiencing significant stress, 30% losing sleep about their finances. But at the same time, there's certainly been a pullback amongst many financial institutions who are less able or less interested to lend or offer other kinds of financial products. So there's it's been a pretty dramatic change.
And what about your business in general, and leading a team through this, and your own, as much as you can feel comfortable sharing with us, your own cash flows and how much you anticipated an impending downturn at that time?
Well, I mean, I don't think we or many people, frankly, anticipated a downturn that would be nearly as sudden or really have these characteristics where many small businesses essentially having to all shut at once. The effect for us, there's certainly been a hit to our revenue, again, as fewer lenders are out there originating new loans or new mortgages, which is important to our sort of bottom line. And so we've had to respond to that, and it's public. We had to reduce our workforce by about 20%, and we've made other real significant changes, including reducing marketing and so forth, so that we can preserve cash flow and ensure that we have a strong and viable business, well through this year into next year. We were thinking about fundraising this year. I would say at this point, I'm not excited about going out and trying to raise funds in 2020. So we've really got to make sure we position the business to be able to get us well into next year, even late next year.
Michele, you've started and successfully exited a few companies. How, as Clearbanc was, continues to have success and raise a lot of money, how prepared were you for what happened on March 12th?
I don't think anyone could have been prepared for this. I think, one of the early indicators for us is so last year, Clearbanc invested about $1 billion into 2,200 different e-commerce companies. And so we're seeing a pretty incredible data set come out of those. And we were seeing problems with inventory coming out of China, obviously the first place hit with COVID. And so we're starting to make some changes around worrying about supply chains for our companies. And I think it's just the escalation path was really, really fast. And so we were doing, work on underwriting, work on, inventory. And then it was I remember that Wednesday, I think the Thursday was the 13th we're talking about, we had everyone in our office and we said, look, we're going to do a test work from home day tomorrow to see if we can all do this. And the 1-day test has become a 6-week test that is looking like it's going to continue on. And so I think it was the speed at which this moved was certainly challenging.
Kirk, a lot of people told me about you and Wave and over the years, and the one thing they always say is how great of a CEO and a leader you are and a communicator. And I'm curious how you communicated this to Michele's point. We were in the same boat where we were talking about, okay, maybe this will be the week where we think about having people work from home, and next thing you know, we were all in lockdown. How was it for you at Wave?
Well, first of all, thanks for the compliment. Secondly, I think, all credit to the people and culture team and to Ashira, to be honest, because they bore the heaviest load through this to Michele's point, figuring out how we were going to transfer to full remote as quickly as possible, how we were going to make sure that safety of the people that worked at Wave was the primary concern. And then pivoting to understanding how we could best support our customers. So I think they've done a remarkable job. And in some ways, the most important communication has been to our customers about what Wave can do to help them weather this unprecedented times and support them through the process. Those two pieces have been, I think, the most important places to communicate effectively to everyone.
We are lucky to have 3 CEOs here who have kind of a dashboard at their fingertips with their companies of where the world is at this moment, given the amount of data that they have. And I've asked Michele, Kirk, and Andrew for whatever they feel comfortable sharing in an anonymized way, just how, give us a sense of the impact in the analysis of this from what you're seeing in terms of the data that you're able to collect. Kirk, why don't I start with you? What's been the impact?
Sure. So as a reminder to everybody, we serve what some people would say is micro small businesses. So typically 0 to 9 employees, most often in the service sector. And I think in some ways we've been very lucky in that the service sector has been hit, I believe, less harshly, obviously, than restaurants and point of sale retail. But we began to see a significant drop in invoicing volume. To give you a sense of it, our platform processes billions of dollars of invoices on an annualized basis in Canada alone. We began to see a significant reduction starting on March 12th, March 13th. And that saw essentially in March about a 15% drop overall. And we're trending towards 30 to 40% in April and really haven't seen it hit its bottom yet. Ontario and Quebec have been the hardest hit, BC less so, and the Maritimes close to Ontario and Quebec. I think what's also interesting is we have access to payroll data. And so on our Canadian payroll business, it's been really interesting. Layoffs spiked in March to about 5x what we would typically see. And we essentially issued a record of employment for 1 out of every 5 employees on our payroll system. Thankfully, that has begun to really slow in April, and hiring is now back in line with typical norms. And obviously, government stimulus is helping that. But those are 2 of the biggest trends we've seen.
Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to share from from the Borrowell database?
I mean, we're really focused on consumers and tracking closely how this crisis is affecting consumers. I mean, it's still, I think, early in the crisis in that we haven't. It'll take time for data around missed bill payments, bankruptcies, and so forth to filter through. But what's clear already is the volume of new accounts being opened, whether it's mortgages or auto loans, credit cards, that is down dramatically. We were speaking with Equifax the other day. They're seeing sort of like a 30% decline in new account openings, and that certainly matches data that we see. So there's just a real slowdown in a lot of economic activity, whether it's buying cars, buying homes, getting new kinds of credit, partially because consumers can't do it. Very hard to go buy a car these days with dealerships closed. And also because many lenders, many banks are pulling back and being much more conservative about advancing any kind of new credit product. So there's a real slowdown happening in consumer credit now. And I think we're all sort of waiting anxiously for what could be a wave of missed payments. Maybe the final thing I'll say is we're also tracking closely the amount of deferred bills. So many banks and mortgage lenders are offering consumers the ability to defer. We know at the start of the month it was around 10%, and that number is growing as well. So a lot of consumers are deferring payments, and we'll be interesting to see how that translates into paid or missed bills in a few months.
That leads to a lot of policy questions, of course, around discretionary spending and how you stimulate an economy. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But Michele, I'm wondering on your end, Clearbanc provides loans to to businesses. What has been the experience on your end?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. So Clearbanc started with this idea to build a bank for the new economy. Our first series of customers were actually Uber drivers and Airbnb hosts. And so I think about if that was still our business today, that would be one of those businesses that dropped from something into zero in 2 days, which is what happened with, I'm an investor in a couple brick and mortar businesses. And it was just, completely devastating to see the results of what happened there. But e-commerce, on the other hand, has largely been relatively stable, because what's happened is, although probably consumer spending is a little bit down, it is largely our only opportunity to buy things right now is to have them delivered to your home. And so what we've seen is an incredible segmentation within that market. And so anything to do with food or at-home fitness is on an incredible surge. I think we're going to see, permanent changes. I think in China, there were e-commerce was up, more than 30%. And the biggest thing is you're creating a new set of buyers that hadn't been created before, right? Like folks like my parents have bought their groceries online for the first time ever in their life. And although that's probably a very normal thing for this demographic to do, getting that consumer set in there and having them as loyal customers is another thing. Then we, in e-commerce, anything to do with events or travel or anything that looked like it was touching those categories. You're selling really great tattoos to go to music festivals. All of those have seen enormous decline. And so what we've really tried to do is segment by category. And then within that, the other thing that's happening is there is, a lot of things that are moving very quickly. And because we're kind of on like the nose of the plane, we're seeing it. So I'll give you an example like toys. The toys and children's category in the first 2 weeks of COVID went through an insane surge because everyone was at home with their children and being like, look, can I have distractions, education, anything that can help me with this insane parenting job that I'm going through? And now we've seen actually a pretty sharp decline because that either initial surge is out or people are worried about their savings and are starting to think about consumer spending again. And so truly every week we are analyzing what some of these categories are going through. But I can tell you there is a lot of very, very big swings that are highly unusual and pretty interesting to watch.
I'm guilty as charged on the toys spending on my end. Okay, so that's where we are, and it obviously leads to what's being done in response. And we don't need to go through the laundry list of government policies that are out there. Read the logic if you want to get a full breakdown on all of them. I guess, Kim, let me go to you because you've of everybody here, you've probably been the most engaged on the policy front with the government as with CVCA. What is your assessment of the approach the government is taking to this crisis? Is it about immediately, stopping the bleeding? Is it about, how much thinking and approach is being done to keeping the innovation economy and all the optimism that we just talked about alive? How are they balancing these competing priorities?
Yeah, so thanks, David. We have been very busy, very active from the onset, trying to figure out and talking to our members, both on the venture and private equity side, about what their portfolio company need, and being really mindful of this is really about the state of your portfolio and what do those companies need to weather that storm. And the conversations that we're having with government, which basically are on a daily basis for the past 6 weeks, have been, okay, the house is on fire. What do we need? And keep your asks for what we need today, understanding that you're in a partnership, so to speak, even though I don't think they would ever use the word partnership. But we feel that from everything that we penned in the first few weeks in terms of our ask, be it RED, wage subsidy, matching programs, and just adding terms, be more flexible in terms of the lending facilities, have all been so far basically answered, the exception of SHRED, which we've seen a little bit of liquidity go to the companies that benefit from that program. And I've said this before, and I've said it on Twitter. I was a official in a past life. I was a political aide in a past life. And for the most part, when you ask something of government, or if government puts towards a policy, once they put a marker in the sand, they usually stand pretty close to that marker. They may tinker around it a little bit, because if you say yes to someone else, then everyone comes knocking. Now, what we've seen with this government is their willingness to have people come and knock on the door, their willingness to take feedback. And we've given a lot of feedback because they started with this sense that they were dealing with the economy as a whole, with the mom and pop shop, with the flower shop, with the garage on the corner. Like, how do we ensure that Main Street stays open, and that these companies that were basically seeing their entire customer base disappear, that was their first inflection point. And then it's been a journey to talk to them about revenue streams. Like, I can think of SaaS companies where the bookings in the future are really what dictates their revenue, and really having conversation. And they may not have gotten everything right on the first time, but to their credit, they're listening and they're open to feedback, and they're open to really concrete examples of stories of companies out there, and they have been readjusting. So I'll stop there because I said a lot, but we're not done. Far from it, but the early onset of the back and forth with government and what they've put forward is, in my opinion, very good.
Neha, as a VC who's kind of in between these two worlds of the companies and the policies, are you satisfied with how government is handling things? We had a story this morning from Catherine McIntyre talking about VC, some of them not unhappy with the matching program and the conditions that are being set by BDC. What has your experience been kind of in the middle of these two worlds?
Yeah, for sure. When everything sort of hit the fan, what was happening behind the scenes is government was actually leaning in very heavily to the innovation sector. They were reaching out to private sector companies, particularly in the digital health realm, and trying to figure out ways that they could offload some of the burden they knew that would be coming onto the public sector, and see if private could pick it up. So that appreciation for the innovation sector exists within government, and they realize that there's only so much capacity that they have, and where the private companies can fill in. I think where the stopgap was, and to Kim's point, is they don't really understand the economics behind how let's call it a tech startup works. And that's where their shortfall was. They've definitely taken in all the feedback being given to them, and you can see how their policies continue to change week over week as they're getting this feedback. But I think had they sort of been educated from the get-go, we could have stopped a lot of companies from having to make massive layoffs or even shut down shop if that reaction had been a bit quicker. With some of the new programs that are coming out, some of the funding programs, I think it's impossible to ask government to decipher who deserves to stay and who deserves to go. I think what government needs to do is, again, lean in on the private sector, lean in on the investors to say, as you triage your portfolio of companies, who are you putting at the top of that list? And, try to find some mechanism to maybe follow through to that, because that's what investors are doing, right? We're taking our portfolios and we're triaging and we're saying, okay, if there's only so much money that we can, provide to continue to support some of these companies and extend their runway, who are those going to be? And so that's, one mechanism the government could use, but, to ask them to, again, it's not a one size fits all. That's the unfortunate part of it. And there's only so much money to go around. I think they're taking in feedback, which I think is the most important piece of this all.
It is a fascinating policy question, right? I mean, is it the role of government, or in this case, I think more clearly of BDC, but is it the role of government to, essentially save companies that are on their last legs, or to use this opportunity to boost the firms that they believe can succeed? So pick winners or spread it across. Andrew, you've been somewhat outspoken about this issue, and I'm curious, how are you feeling about it today, and if some of the measures that have been put in place have alleviated some of your concerns?
I mean, I think the government's traveled quite a distance in the last few weeks, as Neha and Kim have mentioned, and it's obviously a hard time to be making policy. You've got a lot of demands happening in a short period of time. I still think there's a real opportunity, reflecting on all this, to sort of say, how can we get the innovation agenda, and how can we get innovative firms more at the heart of decision making? So, we've heard federal ministers say, hey, look, we talk to the CEOs of the big banks every week, and that's a great thing. And look, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with talking to big bank CEOs, but I think there needs to be more of a reflexive involvement and a reflexive understanding of what's happening in, fast growing tech firms, which I think are really important to the future of Canada. Two examples. The first was, the initial announcement of the wage subsidy. The test was, is your company lost 30% of revenue, year on year? Well, if you're growing at 100% and then you had a 50% decline in revenue, April versus March, that's a huge hit, and you wouldn't have qualified. And again, changes were made, but it would have been nice if even if in the first version we could have had that sort of lens of the innovation economy applied. The second example I'll give is in a number of other countries, for example, US, UK, Australia, fintech firms have actually been involved by the government in supporting small business. So we've got a lot of loans taking place in Canada now that are government backed, to support small businesses. That's great. But what's unfortunate is that it's only been really banks, and frankly, the big banks in particular, who have been asked to deliver those. And why not have, companies like Wave or like Clearbanc, who have so many relationships with small business, have an equal opportunity to deliver some of that support? I just don't think we need more concentration amongst sort of like large firms in this country. We need to give an equal playing field to tech firms, and this is a great opportunity to do it.
I just, and of course, just the backdrop of all of this is the open banking conversation that was happening behind all of this before coronavirus happened, where, government was making decisions around what kind of environment it would be able to make banking available in a more open way. Kirk and Michele, you both wanted to get in. Kirk first.
Yeah, just quickly, echoing Andrew's comments, if you think about what's happening in the US in terms of who's delivering the help to small business, remember that whoever delivers that to small business is getting a 5% fee from the government with no risk. And so if you don't think that Square and Intuit and others are going to come out far stronger through that versus just handing it over to JP Morgan Chase, which is essentially what we're kind of doing in Canada, that leads us in a much worse competitive position versus some of our peers in the US. So that's a perfect example of what Andrew is speaking about.
Michele.
Yeah, I was going to make 2 points on this. I think sometimes people forget in Canada, like, why the tech innovation and why this ecosystem is important. And I always, it's not a perfect stat, but if you look at the combined values of like the FANG stocks, the Facebook, Amazon, Google, they're like $4.1 trillion. Canada's GDP is half that. So again, market cap and GDP are perfect. analogous things. But I mean, these companies are becoming really, really powerful. And whether we believe it's egalitarian or right to pick winners or not, like tech companies build natural monopolies. And it's really important that Canada owns some of those because it's just important in our place in the world. And so I think that's kind of my first piece of framing. And then, you know, I'm 100% in support of what Kirk and Andrew said. I mean, frankly, we do business in 5 countries. We're in the US and Canada. We had the Fed reach out to us on the first day to try and get our data to understand what was happening in the US economy. Took a ton of interest in what we could provide them. Had none of that interest from Canadians. And then the same thing on the ability to distribute some of these PPP loans in the United States. And so I think there is. I understand that it's a small group of Canadian banks, but I think it's 100% that. I mean, we have to use this opportunity to digitize our entire economies. That extends way beyond just what fintech companies are doing. But I would like to see that opportunity be used as well, because I think there's, a remarkable amount of good that can be done. And, when we are in a crisis, things can get done very quickly and we can elevate part of our economies. And this is not just a doom and gloom story.
We have a listener question that kind of touches on this broader point, which I think is worth asking at this moment. And I guess I'll go to Andrew first. Do you think that coming out of this crisis, when we get to that point, that it will have seemed that it favored incumbents and that the idea of disruptive startups actually will it make existing monopolies even stronger as opposed to supporting the startup ecosystem?
I mean, look, I think that's a risk everywhere, not just in Canada. Look at how Amazon has been able to benefit from this. So there really is inherently a risk in the strong getting stronger through this crisis. I think there is an opportunity for policymakers to use this to have counteracting forces. Let's source whatever, PPE we can from smaller firms. Let's use firms, like Wave and Clearbanc and others to to deliver support to small businesses, and as well. So I'm worried that's the direction we're going. I don't think it's because of, let's be clear, I don't think it's because of ill will or some sort of agenda on the part of the folks in government. I just think there's such better links and stronger links between big firms and officials in government than there ever have been between the tech sector and government. And that's on all of us. We can all improve that. But we need to make that more of a reflex to sort of say, yeah, I know to call, Michele or Kirk or whoever it is to sort of get that perspective and be able to sort of deliver a response.
Kirk?
On a more optimistic note, I think what we've found through some of the, if you think about 08 and the companies that got created in 08 and have become, incredible companies, the bottom line is society is changing through this. And usually entrepreneurs and innovators are better at picking up and moving quickly to where the world is going. And I think that is a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs today, is to understand what are things that are going to change dramatically, like e-commerce, like Michele talked about. I mean, that's obvious, but there are a whole bunch of other things that are less obvious. And if you can skate to where the puck goes, given it's a Canadian show, this is a great time to be an entrepreneur.
Kim, did you want to get in?
I think we're going to close on this segment pretty soon. So I thought I would just throw out there that I agree with Andrew. I don't think that anyone set out to exclude people. And I think they went with the easy route, like the route traveled before in terms of people that had worked with them in 08. That being said, we see it. I've already heard early conversations in Ottawa, and I've had conversations with Washington, the Commerce Department, around recovery, a recovery plan. What do officials propose to their leaders? Supply chain, as Michele was talking about earlier, and the early onset of that. What will supply chains look post-COVID? Will we go back to a stronger North American supply chain? What would be the coordination? And I think it's upon us, not just as individuals, but as group working together, to continue to educate, identify where the gaps were, where the opportunities will be. And for me, I've been really clear in all my conversations that we will be successful if at the end of this, as the recovery begins, that we are better capitalized and we're the acquirer and not the ones being acquired, because there will be capital looking for companies that are at risk and easily bought. So we should put all of our heads together in our efforts to accompany the government in their thinking and their drafting of what a recovery plan means for them and for us.
That's a really interesting point that, the macroeconomics and geopolitical environment will have an impact on where that dry powder sitting in the sidelines goes. And it kind of leads me to Neha. As you look at companies now, first of all, what kind of deal flow are you seeing at the moment? Are you still seeing companies come through? And if so, are you having conversations with your partners about geopolitics and macroeconomics around supply chains in where you're wanting to place your bets?
Absolutely. There's just so much uncertainty in the market right now, and to make bets, in any industry right now that's been so severely impacted is just impossible to do. I think that's why a lot of investors are in a holding pattern. They're just holding on to their purse strings, and they're just waiting to see, not necessarily when things go back to normal, because honestly, I'm questioning whether they ever will. I think there's been so many fundamental changes that have happened throughout this downturn, and I think it's led to a lot of new user behaviors. And I think, some of the things we're seeing around e-commerce and grocery delivery and digital health access, I think those are new trends that are going to stay in the long haul. So do you take bets in these new arenas, or, and do you completely avoid sort of industries that have...
Oh, I think we lost Neha there for a minute. Hopefully she can come back. There was a question. Neha, you're back, I think I see over there. I'll just interrupt you and ask you a question that came in from Jacqueline Baptiste from the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation in Toronto. She says, if there's a silver lining about all this, it's the immediate adoption by necessity of tech-enabled solutions for telehealth to e-finance. Are these consumer changes here to stay, or will we revert to our former risk-averse ways? Editorial emphasis hers. Neha, I guess a question for you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me now. I think that is the golden question. Honestly, I don't think anybody has a crystal ball. My personal humble opinion is I think a lot of these new behaviors will stay. But again, it's to be seen. I think she's absolutely right, though. This whole downturn, unlike the dot-com crash where this entire industry imploded, this time of COVID is actually shining a spotlight on the innovation ecosystem, and a lot of companies are at their best right now. And for the ones that are suffering, I think they're doing a lot of innovation internally to figure out, what Kirk was saying, where's the puck going and how can we skate to get there? And I think we're going to see a lot of incredible new business models and companies emerge as a result of this.
When we talk about innovation, we often talk about the private sector, but there's also the public sector and innovation within the public sector. And so we have a question about what are the best ways the public sector can assist in the recovery, thinking about how important health, education, government are. What lessons, this is the real question here, what lessons can government learn from the tech and startup ecosystem to foster more innovation in the public sector? Andrew, you worked in government and now you're on the outside. I'm curious if you have thoughts about how government can innovate itself.
Well, I think there's a lot of innovation that's happened, whether it's government departments and officials working from home, or even, as Kim alluded, just the sheer speed of policymaking, I think, has been pretty incredible. It used to be that you wanted something from government, you'd have to sort of spend time building consensus and waiting for the budget. Maybe it could take years. And we're seeing, huge decisions made in record time. So I think, nothing forces innovation like the need for it, like a situation like this. I'll sort of go back to what I said before. I think the more we can, embed or create strong links between the governmental and innovation and tech sectors, the better it'll sort of be. How can we sort of try to get the same sort of fluidity between people moving from the tech sector into and out of government, like that we have in the financial sector, for example. It's easy to think of big names like Mark Carney or Kevin Lynch, who have gone either from banks to government or governments to banks. How can we get more folks who have experience in venture capital or in tech going into government and the reverse? Because I think that just that'll just be good for everybody as we increase understanding of government and tech and vice versa.
The one of the concerns that came out and over the weekend, Minister Baines announced that the government was looking into foreign investment and concerns about foreign investment in Canadian companies. I'm curious for this, maybe for Kirk, it's a question for Kirk, given that H&R Block is a partner with you. What should in the Canadian ecosystem right now, there are companies that may be more vulnerable. Is there any concern on your part of foreign investment coming in when there are distressed assets at this moment?
I do think, obviously, the country as a whole should be focused on creating more winners ourselves. To that, there is no doubt, and there's no argument against that. But I do think every company is very specific, and every entrepreneurial journey is very specific. And so the blanket statement, I don't subscribe to the blanket statement, obviously, that you should never sell to a U.S. company. Every company is unique. Every situation is unique, and the entrepreneur should have every right to make those decisions. And quite frankly, when we started Wave in 2009, 2010, it was the norm for Canadian companies to sell for 20 or 30 million. And, we had a very successful exit at, 10, 15 times that. And that kind of liquidity is really important for the ecosystem and drives, more innovation. So, there is some good that comes out of this. There is no doubt, as I said before, we should be, looking to create companies that are the acquirers, not the acquirees. But there are lots of situations where this is good for the economy and good for the ecosystem.
Michele, Clearbanc is a global company with office in San Francisco. So I'm curious, you also have some thoughts on this, I'm sure. Oh, and you're muted, if you don't mind.
Sorry, the experiences of Zoom calls everywhere, talking on mute. I think I have a couple of comments on this. I would certainly agree this cannot be used as a blanket statement. And there are things where I think, if you look at the way that we have even tried to source and secure PPE, and I did a bunch of this because we knew a bunch of e-commerce suppliers, and like the red tape in government involved, and like the lack of our own resources to do this on things that I think need to be very strategic have to be looked at in one way. But something like accounting software, like that is not something that we need to be looking. We can look at that very, very differently. And so I think we have to remove this idea of, what is good for the environment. I think it has to be looked at on a very industry specific basis. I think it is so true that when you have those big exits in Canada, it allows people to believe that they can build real companies here. And we have seen that in the last 9 years. That is totally different than what happened a decade ago. And then to just touch on maybe the last question, and especially what government can do, is both government and the innovators have a very short window now where we can get a lot of things done that can set us up for the next 10 years. And so I think that it is right. Government is moving faster than they ever have. I completely applaud them to that, and to take all of that energy with their teams and say, look, we can continue to do this even kind of post-crisis. But what does that look like, right? Like, why did we have these limitations on telehealth that were just like so silly in terms of being able to, get your drugs over the internet and have them safely delivered to your homes? The government just rolled back legislation on marriages. So now you can get married without you being physically in the same place. So there is a window now where we can try and set us up for the next 10 years. And I really encourage both the public policymakers and the innovators to think about kind of these things that have had a lot of red tape for a long time, and saying, like, guys, we got a window. We're going to try this. We're going to see if it goes well, because my guess is that we're going to get a lot of innovation if we can use this as a great time to have those opportunities, instead of, a time to say, okay, let's furl back.
So on that same policy question, it's one that would have been talked about a lot pre-COVID. I'm not sure it's top of mind right now, but are any of you concerned about U.S. tech giants in the marketplace at the moment? I'll just leave that open for anybody who wants to jump in. It's interesting. I mean, it speaks to how the world has shifted in the last 6 weeks, that something that was such a hot button issue seems to have fallen by the wayside in a lot of ways. It's a question from our listeners. If we look down the road 5 to 10 years, as Michele mentioned, what skills will startups need? What are the things that, when you look at your hiring, maybe this is a question for Kirk or Michele or Andrew, what are the skill sets that you think you'll be looking for as a CEO in a post-COVID world? Why don't I start with Kirk?
It's interesting. Hadn't thought about it through that lens, but certainly I think that we've found customer focus and customer empathy is obviously huge through this. We found at Wave, we've always had customer at the center, but there is a buy-in to helping small business owners through this process that is infinitely stronger than it's ever been, which is great and leads to good work. I think there's an empathy and a communication style that's now super important in this new world, especially if we're going more to work from home and those kinds of things. And then all of the usual stuff applies, I think, pre and post COVID in terms of the skills that are necessary in this economy.
Okay. Andrew or Michele, did either of you want to jump in on that?
Look, I think for me, it highlights just the importance of resiliency and hiring and working with people and helping everyone understand that it's not a straight path. One of my favorite quotes about entrepreneurship is, Mike Tyson's quote saying, "Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth." And for a lot of businesses, this is a big, painful punch in the mouth. And how do you help your team, and how do you make sure you're building a culture where that's, look, it's not fun. It sucks that this has happened, but we're going to get through this because we've gotten through challenging things in the past, and we're going to sort of dust ourselves off and care for each other as people and make sure that we're being great people managers, and we're going to move forward and find the opportunity in this. And I think, being able to sort of inculcate that in your culture, boy, it feels more important than ever from where I sit.
A couple of rapid fire questions just to get a sense of where your heads all are. You're all very smart people, and people want to hear your thoughts. So I'm curious. First question is, I'll start with Michele. What kind of recovery do you see us having? Is this going to be a V shape, an L shape, a U shape, whatever letter acronym you want to use?
Too many shapes.
How do you see us getting out of this, and how long do you think it'll take, and what kind of recovery do you think we'll have?
So I'm not an economist. I'm a firm believer on the last question that great entrepreneurs have this like mentality where the paranoid survive. I think part of me is always like thinking there's something behind me chasing me, and that's important because you start thinking about risk. And so I'm probably a little bit less optimistic than most. I don't think it will be a V. I think that we are going to see the first times in our life. And this is a huge comparison because unemployment in the US was at its lowest levels in 50 years or something. Like people were literally coming out of the woodwork before March that we never thought would have jobs. And so I think one of the impacts we're going to see is really, really high unemployment rates, which is going to drag things down. I think, if you look at what the epidemiologists say, like maybe we can do some stuff out of our house, social distancing, hopefully for the summer. And then most people believe that there is going to be a fall surge of this because that's when flu season naturally picks up. And we're still, 12 to 18 months away from a vaccine. So I think, looking at all of that, the economic recovery is probably going to be a little bit slower than we're all hoping, but I think we're going to adapt to a totally different, lifestyle in many ways, and that's going to create some big winners as a result of that. And so instead of thinking about kind of everything, I think about, where are the segments that are going to be, we are probably all going to be wearing masks for the next year to maybe year and a half. Like there's going to be some pretty big changes in terms of what we're seeing.
Michele, are you planning, or do you have plans at this point to go back to your office?
No, I think that's we don't have plans at this point, and I think it's based on really what the government is advising us to do. I mean, we were one of the first to go work from home because my view is always like if we can do it, we should do it because it's actually for the greater good. Like there are, hundreds of thousands of employees that have to go to work every day to protect our frontline workers, and so I think that's something that we're gonna look for, the advice of the government on.
Great. Okay, Kim, I'll go to you. What kind of recovery do you think we're going to have here? And is the CVCA team working from home much longer, or do you see yourselves getting back into an office environment?
Yeah, no, I'm with Michele. Like I sent my team home way before like the demand for it came, just because we could. I don't see ourselves back in the office before September. for sure. And in even September, I was on a call with the 50 CEOs of VC or associations globally yesterday morning, and the Chinese CEO of the VC association there was saying that the government had lifted most of the restrictions in terms of work. You can go back to your office. But just in terms of actions and decisions of corporation and individuals, the social distancing is still very much something that people are continuing to do without being asked, and that people are choosing to work from home. So if you take what Michele said, which I agree with, plus, just our own habits that we're forming right now, I see the potential of a bit of a V and then like a flattening line. Like it doesn't go back up to the full V. Like you see a little bit of a surge, and then it just goes very stagnant and doesn't really grow for a long time. The only thing that makes me think that, Canada, when you look at our level of personal indebtedness and like what we as a society, because you can't spend, because very few things you can buy, because people are being stressed if they've been laid off. I think people are going to take a good look at their personal finances and where they're at. And we may come out of this by people saving and making decisions in their own personal households that will put us in a better position, just because it's right in front of you what you need to do to financially be well off through all of this.
Okay, I'll put you down for what I will call a Nike swoosh recovery. Neha, your thoughts or predictions?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried, specific to the innovation ecosystem. I'm a bit worried that there's going to be another groundswell of companies needing to do mass layoffs or shut down. The ones that have enough runway now to carry them through for, say, 6 months, 12 months. If private sector and investors don't get comfortable enough to start to invest, or if they don't get comfortable, some late stage investors writing big checks, do they need to get comfortable with investing in a company and a team that they've never met? And that's a really big change in behavior. So if they can't get comfortable with that, and companies don't get that funding to sort of stay the course, then I worry there will be another sort of dip when it comes to this sector specifically. Overall, though, I think, a Nike swoosh sounds about right. I think definitely not a V. I don't think things will bounce back to where they were for a while. I think people will. Kim, I think that's a really interesting point. I think people will continue to choose to work from home. These new behaviors will start to stick. I think people are starting to feel comfortable with them. But I think it'll be, a couple of years.
Okay. Kirk, so we have, I think that's 3 Nike swooshes at the moment, if I'm being optimistic, Michele, as opposed to pessimistic, Michele. Kirk.
I'm going to take a different tact, which is not answer your question, but pivot to an important subject, which is that I think one of the biggest things that we need to learn through this is the importance of small businesses in our community, and they are going to get crushed for a long period of time. And I think we need to do everything possible to truly understand how great they make our neighborhoods and our lives in general, and make sure that coming out of this, we do something to really support that side of things. And I think we'll really learn the lesson of how important a role they play, and we'll find ways to make sure that they can come back, but they are getting absolutely crushed right now.
Yeah, the one thing that we haven't talked about is deployment of capital, and just how the length of time it's taken to get money out to these small businesses is one of the challenges. Also, I appreciate your political skills there at avoiding my question. Andrew, to you.
I mean, I would say that maybe a month ago I was trying to think through, or a few weeks ago trying to think through what's the shape going to be. I guess what I think is most relevant and what we're trying to talk about at my business is, look, like, we are in a new world, and sure, certain economic variables are gonna sort of come back, but the idea that somehow we're gonna like be back to where we were before in any sort of meaningful way in any sort of near term, I think is just not possible. There's already been so many effects that I think are just permanent, whether it's, as Kirk said, all the small businesses that are going out of business and are not going to be back, the 111s in the tech space, or the restaurants or bars down the street. I mean, it takes a lot of time to build a business, and it takes a very short amount of time for it to go to business. I think on a personal front, there's a lot of families who are going to see their finances permanently affected by this. I'm really worried about personal bankruptcy. I'm worried about what's going to happen when people start missing payments after deferrals are over. So I just think the way I'm trying to look at this is we are in a new world. Certain economic variables are going to bounce back, but the idea that we're somehow going to go back soon to the old world, I just don't think is right. And as we try to plot the course in our business, it's like we're in a new world. How do we make the best of it? What are the opportunities? And let's not get too attached to what the world was like before, as challenging as that can be.
I think one of the things that struck me the most over the last even 2.5 years of the Logic and covering a lot of your sector is how much it's grown up and how much innovation. You really can't talk about the Canadian economy more broadly and Canada and the future of Canada without talking about the innovation economy. And so we're grateful that some of the leading thinkers and doers in this space have taken the time today to be with us. And we wish you all the very best through this trying time. And with that, I'll send it back to Bruce.
Thank you very much. What an incredible conversation. So many topics, so much context, and so many metaphors. There was a Nike swoosh, there was hockey, there was even a reference to Aladdin, a whole new world. You can hum a few bars if you've got bars at home. Our winner to our question challenge, Mary Jane Owen. She will receive a 1-year subscription to The Logic. Mary Jane, thank you for your question, and thank you to the hundreds of others who submitted theirs as well. This has been an extraordinary conversation, and I want to thank our panelists, Kim Furlong from the Canadian Venture Capital Private Equity Association, Andrew Graham, Borrowell, Michele Romanow, Clearbanc, Kirk, Simpson, Wave, David Skok, the editor-in-chief of The Logic, and Neha, Khera from 500 Startups. Quite the group. I also want to thank PwC for their support of today's event. We are doing quite the pivot for our event next week. We go from the innovation economy to airlines. And that, as challenging as the businesses are that I'm sure all of you run, can you imagine being an airline CEO right now? That will be a lot. So Thursday the 30th, we're going to focus on the North American airline industry and what happens next on that front. A thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and MediaEvents.ca. And most importantly, to David and The Logic, thank you for your partnership. This is the first, and we hope of many, with the Canadian Club working with The Logic down the road. Thank you for your attendance out there. We'll be back with more of these virtual events. Have a great rest of your day.